In this video, I'll be talking about class, a key theme in an inspector calls. This video is great if you are preparing for one of the GCSE or IGCSE examinations. Please make sure you have a pen and paper ready because there are lots of details to get through. Before we start, I just wanted to draw your attention to the way a question on class could be worded differently. So some of these keywords could be used and it's basically asking you the same thing. So instead of saying class, they might ask about social class, wealth. Your wealth determined what class you were in. So it's basically the same thing. Status and social status. Maybe you get a question that's worded about divisions in society or social divisions. Again, we're really focused on how a class-based society creates those divisions. So you want to be talking about the same things basically, regardless of the language in the question. It's all really asking you about Priestley's presentation of the social class system and what he had to say about it. So let's talk about Priestley next. He was a socialist, so his aim in writing this play was to undermine capitalism and the social class structure it created, and promote socialism, and with that comes a classless system that he felt was a much superior way to govern society or to organise society. He believed that a social class system created unnatural and unfair divisions in society between who should be fellow human beings, and he really thought it created an opportunity for exploitation of those who would be considered the weakest, and here we really were talking about the poor working class. And he felt like it bred cruelty between people as well, between the different classes, which we will see. Just a reminder, if you are sitting one of the GCSE or IGCSE exams, you will be expected to talk about language, form and structure. Language being the use of words, basically. Form, thinking about things like dramatic irony, stage directions, lighting, that kind of thing. And then structure is really looking at things like repetition, contrast, juxtaposition, foreshadowing, the way a character changes over the course of the play. All of those things would be considered structure. Okay, so I would start with just setting the scene, because I think what the audience see on the stage is supposed to represent what Priestley believed was the social class system at large. So the opening stage directions, I think, reflect the divisions created by a class-based system, according to Priestley. So we have Edna, the parlour maid, who's clearing the table of dessert plates, champagne glasses, port, and so on. All of these items are great indicators of the Burling family's wealth and therefore their upper middle class status. But the optics here of what the audience are seeing right at the beginning, they're watching a maid who is the representative of the poor working class on stage, the only representative of the poor working class that we physically see. And she's cleaning after others, after others, and they represent the upper middle class and beyond, right? The Burlings and Gerald, basically. And they're there sitting idly, enjoying themselves. And I think this represents what Priestley felt was unjust about the class system. He saw it really as like the rich sitting idly by and benefiting from the hard work of the working class. And then if we think about later, Gerald's parents, we learn, have the titles Sir and Lady. So that tells us that Gerald is from an aristocratic upper class background, and that places him at the top of the social class ladder, if you like. He's the most socially superior on stage. But it's very telling that both his parents are absent from stage. We never get to see them physically. We only hear about them being mentioned. And that could be viewed as a symbol of the social divide that existed between the different classes. And I think this links really well to Priestley's argument about the wealthy elite, because he would argue that they were completely disconnected from the realities faced by ordinary people, even more so than the Burling family. So the class system creates this unfounded sense of superiority, which we certainly see in many of the characters. The audience, as an example, learn that the Crofts, so Sir and Lady Croft, are not happy, specifically Lady Croft. She's not happy with Gerald marrying Sheila. And remember, Sheila is an upper middle class child or daughter of a prosperous manufacturer. So we can only imagine what they would think of the working class people if they think Sheila's not good enough. But their disapproval indicates that with a class-based system comes a sense of superiority, as well as kind of a territorial sense of one's class. The people at the top do not want to share their space with anyone beneath them. And of course, the working class would be considered the most inferior. Rather than defend his daughter's worth, right? Because Mr. Burling has just said, I know that your mom's not happy about you marrying my daughter. She thinks that you could have done socially better than my daughter. One might expect him to defend his daughter's worth, but instead he actually validates her concerns by describing them as only natural. Here we see a complete respect for the social class system from Mr. Burling. And actually more than that, the adjective natural has connotations of something being innate, which assumes that Lady Croft's sense of superiority is just the natural order of things. That's the way Mr. Burling sees it, that she's just naturally superior. It's only natural she should look down upon Sheila. It's not her fault. She was just born more superior than me and my daughter. But the inspector aims to challenge this theory. He argues that the social class system is anything but natural. It is man-made, and it has created a system that unfairly awards worth to a person based on which family they happen to be born into. So he states, we are members of one body. And this is a biblical allusion presenting a notion of equality and community in line with the teachings of Christianity. So what Priestley is doing here is he's appealing to a largely Christian audience. Remember, the play was first performed in England in 1946, and the most prominent religion at that time was Christianity. So he knows his audience well. And what he's doing is drawing parallels between their faith and socialism to promote socialism as the moral way to govern and organise society. So in essence, what he's saying is that a class-based system is anything but natural. In fact, it is morally wrong. The audience witnessed the effects of unfairly awarding importance to people based on their class. By the way, Mrs. Burling tells the inspector he's being a trifle impertinent. So just a reminder, in this moment, the inspector is agreeing with Sheila, who's telling her mother basically, don't build up these imaginary walls between you and the working class. The adjective impertinent suggests that Mrs. Burling feels she deserves much more respect from the inspector than she is receiving. So it reflects her assumed superiority over him and tells us that she expects him to agree with her, not her daughter. This is really quite ironic, since the inspector's job is to investigate and find the truth. But Mrs. Burling's upset basically over him disagreeing with her, and that suggests she thinks her social position should supersede his duty. Likewise, Mr. Burling also tries to put the inspector in his place. He name drops Chief Constable Colonel Roberts, and he says, I ought to warn you that he's an old friend of mine. The verb warn creates a threatening tone in his dialogue and indirectly tells the inspector that he should investigate Mr. Burling no further. Stop while you're ahead, kind of thing. Again, it reflects this belief that Mr. Burling is above investigation and therefore the law. So we're seeing similarities between him and his wife. So what we learn here is that the upper middle class and beyond do not believe they can be challenged by someone from a lower social position. The audience should be reflective here, and this is what the Priestley was hoping would happen. He wants them to consider how likely it is that change will come if we depend on the rich and powerful, who arrogantly believe their opinions and actions should not be questioned, and they believe they are above the law. So what we do notice is, we'll look at the working class in just a moment on the next slide, but actually, in some respects, everyone seems to be some sort of victim of this class system, even Mr. Burling. And I think Priestley was trying to argue that this class system actually breeds social anxieties throughout all the classes. So despite Mr. Burling's apparent success in business, he's somewhat presented as an outsider. In the opening stage directions, he's described as being provincial in speech. The adjective provincial suggests he speaks in an unsophisticated manner, and this juxtaposes him with the formal setting of his home as well as with his wife. His wife is described as her husband's social superior. The hierarchical reference of the phrase social superior clearly outlines the rigidity of the class structure and the inherent snobbery that comes with it. And the audience witness this snobbery in the way the stage direction has Mrs. Burling speak to Mr. Burling reproachfully, and the number of times she tells him how to behave. You're not supposed to say such a thing. Oh, don't think you ought to talk business. Da, 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 da. You shouldn't do that. This isn't how it's done, kind of thing. The adverb reproachfully reflects her disapproving view of her husband, because at this moment he's failing to conform to the polite practices of their social class. Her critical tone in her dialogue reflects the judgment that social class brings with its unwritten rules of respectability. So through this marriage dynamic of Mr. and Mrs. Burling, the audience witnessed the way a class-based system creates hostility between the classes, but not even between the classes actually, between a married couple, suggesting that actually it's impossible to truly work your way through the ranks socially, and Mr. Burling will always be deemed an outsider and not good enough. And we can see this and the effect it has on him. His attempt to impress Gerald with drinking the same port as Lord Craft is a sign of desperation to be accepted by the upper class Croft family, right? Because he says, oh, do you like this port? It's exactly the same port your father gets, okay? Just desperately looking for some approval. Port, being a symbol of wealth and status, is Mr. Burling's attempt to gain respect from Gerald and, of course, his parents more than anything. The audience learn from this dialogue that Mr. Burling is not as self-assured as he likes to present. It's also ironic that he should be so cruel to the working class when he has experienced or is experiencing classism firsthand. He doesn't feel good enough. He's trying to prove himself. Through this irony, Priestley draws attention to the way social divisions create this insecurity in oneself. And this insecurity is clear with Mr. Burling's primary concern being to protect himself from this public scandal that he repeatedly mentions throughout the play. At the beginning, he's joking about there being a public scandal, and by the end, he's genuinely concerned about the way the public will view him. One might consider how such a fragile hold on social status could explain why Mr. Burling is so heartless towards those less fortunate. As one's anxieties over their social position, surely that turns their attention towards protecting themselves rather than others. And is that basically what has happened here? Mr. Burling has to focus on protecting himself because it is such a ruthless system that he doesn't have the capacity to look out for anyone else. I'm not making an excuse because there are other characters on stage that are able to do it, but I'm just trying to understand the motivations and the reasons behind the things that he does. By considering the way a class-based society has created such a hostile environment that aims to keep people in their place, I think Priestley wanted the audience to consider a socialist classless system as an alternative. It's basically saying, look how awful it is. This man has done so well. He's not even comfortable in his own skin. Let's shake off this horrible class-based system. Let's be free. Let's free ourselves of this social anxiety and instead have this wonderful classless system where everybody is each other's equals and we are not competing for a social position. We are all accepted. It sounds all very idyllic. And then, of course, what comes with those social anxieties is what you might argue the degradation of the working class. Now, Edna is the only working class character on stage, as I've mentioned previously. And often, if you notice the way the characters interact with her, the dialogue directed at her begins with imperatives to reflect the commanding tone in which she's addressed by Mr. and Mrs. Burling, okay? Giving us the port, show him, give us, okay? Furthermore, she's also referred to by her first name. I didn't highlight that. Sorry, I should have highlighted Edna as well. She's referred to by her first name, whereas she addresses Mr. and Mrs. Burling as Sir and Madam. So that's kind of reinforcing the social inequality that is central to the play. The fact that Mrs. Burling rings a bell to get her attention, like one might whistle for a dog, could be viewed and should be viewed really as dehumanizing, and it really reflects the degrading ways the working class are viewed by the middle and upper classes in wider society. One must question what chance does a working class person have in a society that dehumanizes them, and this is reflected in Mr. Burling's treatment of Eva Smith when she voices her concerns over her working conditions and pay, and he says she had a lot to say, far too much, she had to go. So despite Eva's attempts at advocating for herself and her peers, Mr. Burling's dismissiveness exemplifies how futile it is for the working class to try and stick up for themselves and try and improve their own position. The non-restrictive clause, far too much, is ironic, considering Mr. Burling starts the play delivering monologues filled with wildly inaccurate forecasts. His criticism suggests that he expects the working class do not have the right to be heard. The semi-modal verb had to creates a sense of necessity, revealing the desire for the middle and upper classes to silence the poor. And again, it's totally ironic because he talks a load of rubbish. Maybe he needs to be silenced. And if you silence the poor and you never truly interact with them as equals, then it's extremely easy to view them as subhuman. We clearly see that in the way Mrs. Burling talks about Eva Smith. She says she was claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd in a girl in her position. So the use of dialogue here reveals Mrs. Burling's prejudice against the working class. The verb claiming reveals a distrust in Eva Smith and an assumption that she must be lying. And then we have the adjectives elaborate and fine that suggest Mrs. Burling doesn't believe the poor are capable of such complex emotions. In fact, the notion that the poor could feel anything substantial is described as absurd by her. And really, what we're seeing in that adjective is Mrs. Burling's complete dismissal of their humanity. Like, there's no way they could be complicated human beings with deep and meaningful feelings. So her prejudice really makes it impossible for her to understand or to feel compassion for Eva's position, and it would explain why she has no remorse by the end of the play, making her a static character, basically a character that does not change. So through this degradation of the poor working class, I think Priestley is posing a question to the audience. I think he wants to ask them, how will the position of the working class ever improve if those that are in positions to help them fail to see them as human beings worthy of respect and dignity? And of course, what he's hinting at there is there needs to be a social revolution. There needs to be a change of power because the current situation is not working for the weakest people in society. But of course, this play ends in hope, okay? There is hope. He sees that there's a light at the end of the tunnel through the young generation, and he believes that there is a classless society possible in the future for Britain. So considering the working class have little to no dialogue in the play, they depend on the more powerful to speak on their behalf. The first and most obvious person to do this is the inspector, who keeps Eva Smith central to the investigation. He informs the Burlings and Gerald that she had no work, no money coming in, and living in lodgings with no relatives to help her, few friends, lonely, half-starved. She was feeling desperate. So here he's using asyndetic listing. It's a listing without the conjunctions, and that emphasizes the relentlessness. It makes the list sound endless, okay? The relentlessness of her hardships, and also the semantic field of suffering in the words lonely, half-starved, and desperate highlight her emotional, physical, and mental turmoil. And this is a really emotive presentation of Eva, which juxtaposes with the dehumanizing ways the other characters have treated her or spoken of her. It serves really as a reminder that the working class are human beings, they have human emotions, and they deserve to be treated as equals. Sheila and Eric both work to defend the poor in their interactions with their parents also. We see it at the beginning as well as at the end. At the beginning of the play, Eric tells his father, "I don't see why she should have been sacked just because she'd a bit more spirit than the others." The adverb just serves to belittle the reason for Mr. Burling to have fired Eva Smith, and so he's critical of him. And he presents it basically as completely unreasonable. Just to use the word just undermines Mr. Burling. He also, I love the fact that he mentions her spirit. And by mentioning her spirit, he's recognising her as a human being with a soul and a character. It's the antithesis of the objectified manner with which his father views his workforce. And of course, this foreshadows the fact that Eric is capable of change. He's capable of compassion, which we will see at the end of the play. Likewise, we see these early signs that give us hope in Sheila as well. She stresses their humanity, the employees' humanity, by stating, but these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. Again, she's speaking to Mr. Burling. The juxtaposition of cheap labour and people demonstrates the way Sheila, again, humanises the poor. And she's challenging her father's degradation of them. So the contradictory tone that we see in both Eric and Sheila reflects their ability to be critical thinkers, and it's what enables them to change, and it's what makes them dynamic characters, because they are critical thinkers. They are capable of thinking independently of their parents, and they're capable of challenging them. So we see it right at the beginning, and please use that word term foreshadowing, because that is one of a structural technique that you'll want to incorporate. But I think what we're seeing here as well, with them being critical thinkers, is I think it's Priestley modelling what he wants to see in his audience. He wants his audience to be critical thinkers. He wants, he's trying to tell them, don't look around you and just accept the status quo. You should be thinking critically about the world you live in, and you should not be afraid to stand up against it. And so, linking this to class, unlike what the social class system promotes, he argues that the middle and upper classes are not above challenge. They do not have all the answers. So again, he's challenging this notion that the middle, upper classes are superior and above criticism. He's saying they're not. Okay, just look at Eric and Sheila. They're not afraid to challenge their own parents. I think it's really fitting to end with this quote said by Sheila to her mother towards kind of the latter half of the play. She says, "You mustn't try and build up a kind of wall between us and them." Sheila perfectly summarises the effects of a class system, I think, in this quote. And I think it's a really important one for this theme. Because what she's saying is that a class system divides fellow human beings and creates a sense of otherness, which is indicated by her use of diction there, us and them. But It is just a metaphorical wall. It's built by our imaginations and it's reinforced by our opinions and actions. It is not natural, as Mr. Burling would argue. It's a social construct that is creating greater harm than good. This is what Sheila has come to realise, and of course right now she's being the mouthpiece of Priestley. The modal verb mustn't creates a sense of urgency in her dialogue, and what she's arguing for is that we need to bring down these imaginary walls. And of course what she's doing here is echoing Priestley's advocacy for a classless society, and also what she's doing is kind of calling for a revolution, a complete overhaul of the current system, you might interpret. Okay, she realizes we need to bring down these divisions. We need to stop thinking that we are separate to these other people. We're not. And so that brings us to Priestley's overall argument. Remember, when you're writing your conclusion, you'll want to bring it back to this overall point you think he was trying to make through this theme. And I think ultimately he's saying the class system is morally wrong. He's going to use the audience's faith and say it's not in line with the Christian faith, it's morally wrong, it's evil, and it's not natural. And I think his criticism there is that the class system creates inequalities and dehumanises the poor. And so he's advocating for a classless system, one that is socialist, that creates a sense of equality and community, which is the complete opposite to a class-based system. I would love to hear your own thoughts. Please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section, and you can always reach out to me directly at my email, mrsrumsey@mrsrumsey.com.